Tom Hendricks was standing in the circuit court in Clayton County, Iowa, on March 14, 2019, when his daughter Sarah pulled a piece of paper from her backpack that the bank's lawyer had never seen before. The lawyer went quiet. The judge leaned forward. Tom didn't move. Sarah was 13 years old, and she had just saved 240 acres that had been in her family since 1947. The bank had been wrong about the payment schedule for 11 months. Sarah proved it in less than 2 minutes. If you've ever been told you didn't understand something when you knew you did, this story might feel familiar. A lot of people watching this channel know what it's like when someone in a suit assumes you're confused just because you're quiet. If that's you, consider subscribing. These stories don't show up in the news much anymore, but they still happen. It was a Thursday morning in late April 2018 when the letter arrived. Tom was fixing a section of fence along the south pasture where the Holsteins had pushed through during the spring mud. The envelope was from First Prairie Bank in Elkader. He opened it standing in the driveway. Notification of default. Payment due April 12th. No payment received. Foreclosure proceedings to begin in 30 days unless full arrears paid. Tom read it twice. He had made the payment. He had made every payment for 6 years. He walked into the house and pulled the ledger from the desk drawer in the kitchen. The ledger had been his father's. Green canvas cover, pages ruled in columns, every transaction logged by hand in blue ink. April 12, 2018. Check number 4429, $2,847. Mailed April 9th, 3 days early. He called the bank. The woman who answered said she'd transfer him. He waited 4 minutes. A man came on the line and introduced himself as Derek Pullman, senior loan officer. Tom explained the situation. Pullman said the bank's records showed no payment received for April. Tom said he had the check number and the date. Pullman said check numbers didn't mean the check had cleared. Tom said it had cleared. He had the statement. Pullman said he'd look into it and call back. He didn't call back. Tom called again on Monday. Pullman wasn't available. He called Tuesday. Pullman was in a meeting. Wednesday, Pullman took the call. He said the bank had reviewed the records and there was no April payment. Tom asked if they had reviewed the March payment. Pullman paused and said, yes, March had been received. Tom said the April check had been cashed on April 14. Pullman said that wasn't showing in their system. Tom asked what he was supposed to do. Pullman said pay the arrears or the foreclosure would proceed. Tom Hendricks was 51 years old. He had grown up on that land. His father had bought it in 1947 for $18,000, which was considered high at the time because the soil was good and the barn was already standing. His father had run a dairy operation until 1983, when the milk prices dropped and he switched to beef cattle and corn. Tom had taken over in 2001. The place was 240 acres, a white farmhouse built in 1912, a red barn with a concrete floor and a hayloft that still held square bales from 2 seasons back, and a machine shed that housed a John Deere 4440, a Case IH planter, and a Massey Ferguson baler his father had bought used in 1979. The farm was worth about $900,000 in 2018 if you sold it whole. The loan balance was $164,000. Tom had refinanced in 2012 when rates dropped. The payment was $2,847 a month. He had never missed one. His wife Linda worked part-time at the county extension office. His son Jacob was in the Army, stationed in Georgia. His daughter Sarah was in 8th grade at Central Community School. She was quiet, not shy exactly, just the kind of child who listened more than she spoke and noticed things other people didn't bother with. Tom hired a lawyer. The lawyer's name was Paul Eckert. He had an office above the hardware store in Elkader. He charged $175 an hour. Tom showed him the ledger, the bank statements, and the letter. Eckert said it looked straightforward. The bank had made a mistake. He'd write a letter. He wrote the letter. The bank responded 3 weeks later through their own attorney, a woman named Monica Garrett from a firm in Cedar Rapids. Garrett's letter said the bank's records were accurate and Mr. Hendricks was in default. If payment was not received by June 15th, Foreclosure would proceed. Eckert said they'd have to go to court. Sarah had been keeping track, not because anyone asked her to, just because she was the kind of person who noticed when her father stopped talking much at dinner and her mother's mouth got tight around the edges when the phone rang. She had heard the word foreclosure. She knew what it meant. She also knew her father kept records. She had seen the ledger on the kitchen table. One evening in mid-May, after her homework was done, she asked if she could look at it. Tom said yes. She sat at the table and turned the pages slowly. The entries went back to 2012. Every payment, every date, every check number. The handwriting was her father's, careful and square, the same way he wrote notes on the feed invoices. She noticed something. The payments were supposed to be on the 12th of every month. But Tom didn't always mail them on the 12th. He mailed them early. 3 days early, sometimes 5. The checks cleared a few days after they were mailed. That meant the bank received them before the due date. But the bank's records showed them applied on different dates. Not the date they were received, not the date they cleared. A third date. A date the bank had assigned. Sarah didn't understand why that mattered, but it felt wrong. She wrote it down. She asked her father if she could see the bank statements. He gave her a folder. She went through them at the kitchen table while he and Linda watched the news. She matched every check number in the ledger to every cleared transaction on the statements. They all matched. Every payment had cleared. Every one. Then she noticed something else. In March 2018, 2 payments had cleared in the same statement period. One was the March payment. The other was dated February 27, but the February payment had already cleared in February. She checked the February statement. There it was. Check number 4401, February 12, cleared February 15. But the March statement also showed a transaction for February 27 with the same check number. 2 transactions, same check, different dates. She showed her father. Tom looked at it for a long time. Then he called Paul Eckert. Eckert said it sounded like a clerical error. He'd bring it up in court. The court date was set for March 14, 2019. That was 10 months after the first letter. 10 months of Tom trying to work the farm while the weight of losing it sat in his chest. He sold 30 head of cattle that fall to cover legal fees. Linda picked up extra hours. Jacob sent money from his army pay when he could. Sarah kept going through the records. She found more. In 2015, a payment had been recorded twice in 1 month. Then a gap showed in the next month, even though the ledger and the statement both confirmed the payment had been made. In 2016, the same thing. A doubled entry in June, a missing entry in July. The payments had all cleared. The bank had received the money, but their internal records showed gaps and duplications that didn't match reality. Sarah made a chart. She used poster board from the art supplies in her room. She listed every payment from 2012 to 2018 in 3 columns. Column 1 was the ledger. Column 2 was the bank statements showing the checks had cleared. Column 3 was what the bank claimed in their records. She used a red marker for the discrepancies. There were 11 of them. Paul Eckert didn't know about the chart. Tom had tried to explain what Sarah had found, but Eckert said the core issue was the April 2018 payment, and they needed to focus on that. He said bringing in too much other information would confuse the judge. Tom didn't push it. He wasn't a lawyer. Sarah brought the chart anyway. The courtroom was on the 2nd floor of the Clayton County Courthouse in Elkader. It was an old building built in 1903 with tall windows and wood paneling that had gone dark over the years. Judge Raymond Keller presided. He was 64 years old and had been on the bench for 19 years. He ran a quiet courtroom. People who talked out of turn got one warning. Tom and Linda sat at a table on the left with Paul Eckert. Sarah sat in the first row behind them with her backpack. Monica Garrett sat at the table on the right with a man from the bank named Stephen Albrecht. Albrecht was the regional vice president. He wore a gray suit and a blue tie, and he had a leather folder in front of him with the bank's logo embossed in gold. Eckert presented first. He showed the ledger. He showed the April bank statement with the cleared check. He showed the transaction history proving the payment had been made and received. He argued that the bank's claim of non-payment was factually incorrect. The payment had cleared on April 14, 2018. The bank had the money. The default notice was issued in error. Monica Garrett stood. She said the cleared check was not in dispute. The issue was the bank's internal application of the payment. She said the payment had been applied to a different account due to a coding error and had not been credited to Mr. Hendricks' loan until May. Therefore, the April payment was late. Late payments constituted default under the terms of the loan agreement. She handed the judge a copy of the loan contract with the relevant section highlighted. Judge Keller read it. He asked if the bank had notified Mr. Hendricks of the coding error at the time it occurred. Garrett said no. The error had been identified during a routine audit in April 2018. Keller asked why the bank had not corrected the error and credited the payment before issuing a default notice. Garrett said the bank's policy required a formal default process once a missed payment was identified in the system. Keller didn't look happy. He said it seemed unreasonable to foreclose on a borrower because of the bank's own internal mistake, particularly when the borrower had made the payment on time. Garrett said the loan terms were clear. Payments had to be applied to the correct account by the due date. That hadn't happened. She said Mr. Hendricks had remedies available, including paying the arrears to cure the default. Tom sat very still. Sarah could see the side of his face from where she was sitting. He wasn't looking at the judge. He was looking at the table. Paul Eckert stood again. He argued that the coding error was not Mr. Hendricks' responsibility and that penalizing him for the bank's mistake was unjust. He said the payment had been made in good faith, on time, and the bank had received the funds. Foreclosure was not warranted. Judge Keller said he was inclined to agree. He asked Garrett if the bank had any other basis for the foreclosure beyond the disputed April payment. Garrett said no. Keller said he was prepared to rule in favor of Mr. Hendricks and dismiss the foreclosure action. That was when Sarah stood up. She didn't raise her hand. She didn't wait to be recognized. She just stood and said, "Your Honor, there are 10 more." The courtroom went quiet. Keller looked at her. Garrett turned around. Tom started to say something but stopped. Sarah was holding the poster board. It was folded in half. She unfolded it and held it up. Judge Keller said, "Young lady, this is not the time." Sarah said, "They did this 10 other times. I can show you." Paul Eckert stood and said, "Your Honor, I apologize. This is Mr. Hendricks' daughter. She's..." Keller held up his hand. He looked at Sarah. He said, "What do you have?" Sarah walked forward. She didn't ask permission. She walked straight to the judge's bench and laid the poster board on top of it. Keller looked down. The chart was neat, 3 columns, red marks, dates, check numbers. He studied it for 30 seconds. Then he looked at Monica Garrett. He said, "Counselor, what is this?" Garrett stood. She said she didn't know. She hadn't seen it before. Keller said, "It appears to be a payment discrepancy chart spanning 6 years. He looked at Sarah. He said, "Did you make this?" Sarah said yes. Keller said, "Explain it to me." Sarah explained. She spoke quietly but clearly. She said every payment her father made had cleared. She said the bank's records showed some payments applied late, some applied twice, some not applied at all, even though the money had been received. She said it happened 11 times between 2012 and 2018. She said the April 2018 payment wasn't a one-time mistake. It was a pattern. Keller asked if she had documentation. She said yes. She opened her backpack and pulled out a folder. Inside were photocopies of the bank statements, the ledger pages, and a typed summary she had written the night before. She handed it to the judge. Keller read it. Then he looked at Monica Garrett again. He said, "Do you want to respond to this?" Garrett stood. She looked at Stephen Albrecht. Albrecht's face had gone red. He opened his leather folder and started flipping through papers. Garrett said she would need time to review the materials. Keller said, "How much time?" Garrett said at least a week. Keller said, "You have until Monday. I want an accounting of every payment Mr. Hendricks made from 2012 to present, cross-referenced with your internal records and the cleared checks. If this chart is accurate, we have a much larger problem than one missed payment." He recessed the hearing. Tom and Linda stood. Sarah put the folder back in her backpack. People in the courtroom were talking quietly. Paul Eckert was staring at the poster board still sitting on the judge's bench. He said, "Sarah, where did you get all this?" She said, "The kitchen table." On Monday, March 18, 2019, Monica Garrett filed a motion to dismiss the foreclosure action. The motion included a letter from First Prairie Bank acknowledging errors in payment application and confirming that Mr. Hendricks' loan was current and had been current throughout the period in question. The bank issued a formal apology. They also refunded $1,200 in late fees that had been charged incorrectly over the years. Stephen Albrecht was reassigned to a different region 3 months later. Derek Pullman left the bank in June. The details were not made public. Tom Hendricks still farms the land, 240 acres. The loan was paid off in 2023. Sarah graduated high school in 2023 and enrolled at Iowa State to study agricultural business. She told her father she wanted to learn how the money side worked so fewer people got caught the way he almost did. The ledger is still in the kitchen drawer. Tom still writes every transaction by hand, but now Sarah keeps a digital copy backed up in 3 places. She updates it every month. Judge Keller retired in 2024. At his retirement dinner, he told a story about a 13-year-old girl who walked into his courtroom with a poster board and taught him something about the difference between a person being wrong and a system being broken. He said he thought about that case whenever he reviewed a foreclosure petition now. Curtis Lamb was in the courtroom that day in March 2019. He was a retired farmer who had sold his own place in 2011 and spent his mornings at the county courthouse watching cases because he didn't have much else to do. He told people later he'd seen a lot of legal arguments over the years, but he'd never seen someone so young stand up in front of a judge without being asked and just lay out the truth like it was the most obvious thing in the world. He said Sarah didn't look nervous. She looked like she knew. The land is still there. The White House, the Red Barn, the machine shed with the John Deere and the Massey Ferguson. The fence Tom was fixing the day the letter came is still standing. Sarah helped him finish it that summer. They used treated posts and 5 strands of barbed wire. It hasn't needed repair since. Sometimes the person who saves the day isn't the loudest one in the room. Sometimes it's the one who was paying attention the whole time.